Okay. Just... Okay, welcome everyone. I'm very glad to have you here with us. We are here today because we are having the 7th workshop on philosophy of mind, organized by the Institute of Philosophy at the University of Antioquia. We have a title in Spanish, which is VII Jornada de Filosofía de la Mente. And today we are gonna focus on 2 main topics on the philosophy of mind. The first is self-knowledge, and the second is mental agency. These 2 topics have attracted the contemporary philosophy of mind, many philosophers in contemporary philosophy of mind. There are a lot of work carried on these 2 topics, and therefore we thought that it would be very nice to have this space to discuss with some philosophers working on these research areas. So we are having 5 guests, and we have 2 main international speakers. We have Beate Krickel, Professor Beate Krickel from the University of Berlin, and we also have Professor Eric Schwitzgebel from the University of California in Riverside. So before we can start, we have to make Eric Schwitzgebel panelist. So wait a minute. Laura, por favor, volvemos al profesor Eric Schwitzgebel, panelista.
Yeah, that's
okay. Great. So Eric, I hope that you can now share your camera. Yeah, nice to see you, Eric. Can you turn on your microphone?
Yep. Is you hearing me?
Yeah, we can hear you. I'm very glad to see you again.
Yeah, good to see you.
Yeah. So I'll continue with the introduction. Yeah, so today we have 2 main invited speakers. We have Beate Krickel from the Technische Universität Berlin, and we also have Professor Eric Schwitzgebel from the University of California in Riverside. And so they are gonna present their talks, and then we will have a short break. And then we will have 3 more talks, one by Santiago Gudello, who is a philosophy student in the University of Antioquia. Then we will have Salvador Chinchilla, also a student. And finally, we will have Laura Valencia, who is also a student of us. Thank you all for joining. Thank you to speakers for accepting our invitation, especially to Eric, who woke up very early this morning. And so now, Beate, you have, please, you can start with your talk.
Thank you. And thank you very much, Santiago, for inviting me for this. This is really a great opportunity for me to go back to that topic and my paper, my 2018 paper. And I always wanted to go back to that. So that's, a great opportunity for me to do that. I will try to share my slides. And you should be able to see them now. I have
Yes, perfect. We can see them.
Okay. Good. I will quickly rearrange the cameras so that they are not. Okay, perfect. So I will talk about implicit bias and repression. And as I said, this is based on a paper that I published a few years ago before the pandemic. So much of this will be a summary of this, but I want to build in a few things that I wanted to integrate and think about and potentially work on a new paper on that topic. Okay, so what are implicit biases? Probably most of you have heard about this and know what it is, but just to be sure to be on the same page here. Here's an example. So imagine a person who is responsible for job interviews, so for selecting the candidates. And as it happens, this person always, when confronted or having to decide between a female applicant and a male applicant, he will always choose a male applicant. And now there are different types of scenarios here. Either you can imagine that, or the scenario is that the applicants are indeed equally qualified. So there are studies where CVs are sent out to people and the CVs are the same. The only thing that differs is the gender of the person, of the applicant. And it turns out that male applicants will get the job with higher probability. Or you can find scenarios where the interpretation of the skills of the applicants as qualifications is adapted according or depending on the gender. So there are studies where subjects or participants have to say whether a female applicant or male applicant are better qualified as a job. I think it was a police chief or whatever. And it turns out that they always come up with explanations of why the qualifications of the male applicant are actually, or the skills are actually qualify him better for this job than the woman. So there's always a reinterpretation going on of the skills as qualifications. And additionally, if you ask now this person doing these job interviews, he will answer that, oh no, I don't think that men are generally better qualified for the job than women. So he would not say that this is a reason to choose the male applicants over the female applicants. But as a matter of fact, this person does this. And now we would say that this person now is implicitly biased against women in that scenario. Here's a more technical or a definition of what I take implicit biases to be. I still have to get, sorry, I can't see my cursor now. Okay, your pictures are a little bit on my slides, so I have to do a bit of guessing what is, but I can't remove it now. Okay, so here's my definition. An implicit bias is a psychological disposition of a subject S that manifests in a behavior B, where 4 conditions are satisfied. This behavior B involves the deviation from norms of fairness. I take this formulation from the paper by Frankish. Second, this behavior B is caused by a mental state M of the subject. This behavior B looks like this mental state M is something like a belief that P, but S reports that she does not believe that P. So as in our example, our person shows a certain behavior, namely he chooses the male applicants over the female applicants. This involves a deviation from norms of fairness because it's not based on the actual skills of these people, but only on gender. Now, this behavior is caused by a mental state. That's the assumption, or that's an assumption that behavior is caused by mental states. And now the behavior looks like this mental state that causes the behavior is the belief, something like women are stupid or women are not qualified for the jobs that I'm advertising. And now the last condition, still the person in our example says, no, I don't believe that women are not qualified for these jobs. And this report in condition 4 is often called the explicit attitude, or what the report is about. So the explicit attitude of this person seems to be women are equally qualified as men for these jobs. And this mental state that causes this behavior is often called the implicit attitude, or this is how I want to use these terms. So the implicit attitude seems to be a belief that women are not qualified. Now, a few notes on these implicit attitudes, so the mental states that cause this biased behavior. It is disputed whether implicit attitudes are beliefs or beliefs or belief-like or dispositions, or whether they are affective states or associations or something else. I don't want to go into that discussion. The model that I'm going to present assumes that these implicit attitudes are associations. And this is, I think, still the majority position. Many philosophers and psychologists agree, or they argue, that implicit attitudes underlying biases are not conscious. So this is even often part of the characterization or definition of an implicit bias. So the person who shows this biased behavior is not conscious of this implicit attitude, and probably neither of the biased behavior, or that it is biased. Why would you think that? So why do people think that implicit attitudes are not conscious? And I think this justification for this unconscious claim, that it is an inference to the best explanation between the mismatch between the implicit and the explicit attitude. So when you look at these two, the third and fourth condition, so the third describes the behavior that is due to a mental state. This is the implicit attitude that looks like it is a belief that P, but S reports that she does not believe that P. And now the question is, why doesn't she report that she believes that P if this seems to be what causes the behavior? Well, and now the best explanation seems to be, well, because it's not conscious. The person doesn't report it because she's not conscious of having this belief, or she's not conscious of this belief. Yeah, this is what I just said. So the best explanation of this mismatch seems to be that it is unconscious. But is this really so? So is this really the best explanation? Now, in the recent years, many people have raised criticism against this claim. Usually, or often, it's based on empirical evidence. For example, Hahn et al. Could show that subjects can predict their scores in an implicit association test if asked to introspect their gut feelings. And Hahn is still working on that and publishing studies that seem to show that. So I won't go into the details of the implicit association test. I assume many of you know that. If not, it doesn't matter too much. So this is a test that apparently can measure these implicit attitudes. And now Hahn asked people to introspect on their affective reactions. So they call it affective reactions in the paper, or gut feelings, and asked them, what do you think? How do you think you will score in this test? And surprisingly, or not, these subjects could predict their scores quite well, and they could predict their own scores way better than the scores of other people. And now Hahn et al. Interpret this as showing that indeed these implicit attitudes are conscious. And other people have raised other arguments. I won't go into detail here. I want to ask the question then, but then what explains this mismatch? So what is the better explanation than that it is unconscious? And a potentially better explanation of this mismatch is the APE model together with the CIA. I will explain what this means now. So the APE model is the associative propositional evaluation model, brought forward by Garonsky and Bodenhausen in a paper from 2006, and they have further papers on that model. So this is first a model about what implicit attitudes and explicit attitudes are. And they seem to have a dual system account, assuming that the implicit attitudes result from an associative network. The associative network receives an input, and then activation spreads, and all the neighboring nodes are activated, and this then gives rise to this implicit attitude. So for example, there's somewhere female is represented, which is, and a neighboring node is, I don't know, stupid. So seeing a woman then activates the stupid node, and this then gives rise to an implicit attitude. And this is what Garonsky calls associative evaluation based on an affective reaction. And now there is the second system. This is the system of propositional reasoning. This is where people really rationally think about their implicit attitudes and the world. Oh yeah, I forgot this. Because the associative evaluations are affective reactions, they are introspectively accessible because they are felt. So you have introspective access to these affective reactions. And now your propositional evaluations, they are based not on associations, but on logical inferences, and they have truth values. So this is maybe a kind of standard dual system account of reasoning. Now, this doesn't yet explain the mismatch in the case of implicit bias. So what explains this mismatch? According to Garonsky, it's what he calls the cognitive inconsistency approach, or the CIA. And Garonsky says that the mismatch is best explained in terms of cognitive inconsistency. And this presupposes that the mental state, so the implicit attitude, that it is conscious. So it is not only, doesn't only require that it is not unconscious, it requires that it is conscious. Here's an example to illustrate this, taken from a paper by Garonsky. So here, in this example, we have a person who has a certain set of beliefs. The first belief is, I dislike African Americans. And this is due to this affective reaction, so this association, this implicit attitude. And this implicit attitude now leads to this belief. The second belief is that African Americans are a disadvantaged group. And the third belief is that negative evaluations of disadvantaged groups are wrong. Just one side remark, Santiago, I can't see my the time here. So if you tell me after, I don't know, 35 minutes, that would be nice. Perfect. Thank you. Okay, so now Garonsky argues this set of belief is not consistent. So now the person is in a state of cognitive inconsistency. And now implicit biases arise because now the cognitive inconsistency is resolved in a certain way. Namely, the person here with a set of beliefs decides to just reject this first belief. So the person decides to, okay, in order to be consistent, I reject that I dislike African Americans. And now this doesn't de facto explain our mismatch. So now we can explain that the behavior of this person will still look like she believed that she disliked African Americans because she still has this affective reaction. She still has the associations. So this will still, if they influence behavior at all, and this is our assumption here, then they will still influence her behavior towards African Americans. So she will still show biased behavior. But still, because she rejected this first belief, she won't report anymore that she has this belief because she rejected it. Okay, so this is Garonsky's explanation of the mismatch based on his account of what implicit and explicit attitudes are. And here's, just to make that clear, a quote from a paper by Garonsky and Bodenhausen. They argue that in such cases, so in cases of cognitive inconsistency, the necessary reassessment of the activated information involves conscious awareness of the involved processing steps, such as the negation, that is the reversal of the truth value of a particular proposition, or the search for information that resolves the inconsistency. So here, as I said, the implicit biases arise because there is a negation happening. So we the person negates this first belief, and they think that this is a conscious process. So I'm aware of all these processing steps. I think this account is problematic for at least two reasons. First, implicit attitudes underlying implicit biases, although in principle can be made conscious, they are usually unconscious. And I think that there's at least empirical evidence pointing in that direction. Namely, people are usually surprised or even shocked when they realize that their implicit attitudes do not match their explicit attitudes. So this is usually just reported in studies where people, where they investigate implicit attitudes, that people often are at least surprised, or they even get angry. And this seems to indicate, on the assumption that they are not just very good actors, that they didn't know that they have these implicit attitudes. But the CIA says that this mismatch arises due to a conscious process of reestablishing cognitive consistency. So people shouldn't be surprised because they have done this consciously, this negation. So they should be aware of that they had these beliefs. The second problem is that explicit evaluations that are based on affective reactions, they cannot simply be rejected based on intellectual insight alone. So compare this with this example. I dislike bananas because I don't know, I always have this feeling that I have to throw up when I see a banana. But I have a set of further beliefs. I do not want to eat food I dislike. Bananas are healthy. I want to eat everything that is healthy. Now, this gives you some degree of cognitive inconsistency. You cannot have all of these beliefs. You need to do something. And now the CAA says that what you're doing is simply reject the belief that you dislike bananas. But on the assumption that you still have this feeling that you have to throw up when you see a banana. So this is still there, and all the other beliefs, and you consciously, with full awareness, reject, oh, then I get rid of my cognitive inconsistency by rejecting that I dislike bananas. And this is impossible. So, or not the way it is described, it isn't as simple as this. Something else must be happening. Can't be what is going on. And I think what is going on is repression. So I think repression is the better explanation. So don't think that cognitive inconsistency is the right explanation. And I want to now ask the question, what is repression? And this is what I want to work on further, developing a model of repression. But first, an example. So forget about implicit bias for a moment. Just we talk about repression now. So here's an example of repression that I think is taken from Hart, 1982. So here we have a person. This person has a best friend, this person, and the best friend has a partner. And now the person is in love with her best friend's partner. So she has these affective reactions. And this is a problem for this person. So it induces an inner conflict. She doesn't want, so she lives in a society where it's not okay to have an affair or anything with your best friend's partner. This is not okay. So this probably will induce shame. She will be ashamed and feel really bad about herself and the whole situation, and she doesn't know what to do. Now the solution is repression. That means she represses something, some mental states involved here into the unconsciousness or in das Unbewusste. And that means she's not aware of, or as a result, she's not aware of this inner conflict anymore, and she doesn't feel shame anymore. So situation solved. She's still in love with her best friend's partner, but she doesn't feel bad about it anymore because she's not conscious of this situation anymore. So this is what I call the surface description. So I think in the paper I have it written down, but describing this situation as I did it is what repression is supposed to be. So every model of repression somehow has to make sense of this scenario. So this is one criterion of adequacy, capturing this surface description. But of course, this still doesn't tell us what repression or how repression works. And the goal, my goal, is to find a model of repression or develop a model of repression that captures the surface description that can be used for scientific research and is compatible with contemporary science and psychology. And I think mentioning this is important in the context of psychoanalysis, because many concepts of psychoanalysis that are also in the area of repression are not accepted by contemporary science. For example, the Oedipus complex and so on. So many people argue that repression has something to do with the Oedipus complex, but I would argue that a model of repression has to capture the surface description without relying on this more complex or this controversial notions. What I don't want to do is an exegesis of Freud. Freud was very inconsistent and complicated and wasn't really clear what he has in mind. I will say more on this in a minute. I don't want to present all models of repression that have been proposed since Freud. There is tons of books and articles on psychoanalysis and repression. So it is, at least for a talk or a paper too much to just capture all of them. I want to focus on two models here, and these models, I call these models the higher order model of repression and the separation model of repression. And I think that the ideas underlying these models, they can be found in Freud's work. So I won't prove that, but if you want, I can send you some quotes afterwards. Okay, so here is the higher order model. Looking at our examples, the higher order model describes this scenario as follows. So it says that in this scenario, a higher order mental state is prevented that is necessary for consciousness. And some argue that it is a knowledge state. Others say that's something like awareness or attention. So Schechner and others call it selective inattention. And others argue for a combination, which I think is most is an interesting idea, namely arguing that this inattention is the procedure by which the knowledge state is prevented. So the idea is that in our example, this person repressing her affections for her best friend's partner means that she does not pay attention to it and thereby prevents knowing of it. So she doesn't pay attention to her affections and therefore doesn't know about them. I think this is an interesting idea. Before we come to problems of this, let's look at the separation model. Oh no, I have the problems first. Makes more sense. Okay, so why do I think that this model is problematic? So as I said, I think this combination model is most interesting. So here the idea is that the affections are unconscious because this person, she does not know that she has them because she selectively does not pay attention to them. So selectively means she does not pay attention to these affections, but all other affections that she might have, she's of course might still be conscious of those. So it's just selectively only not paying attention to this. So here's what I think is problematic about this. As I said, repression presupposes an inner conflict. So repression starts with an inner conflict. And here the inner conflict is, I'm in love with my best friend's partner, but I don't want to be for reasons. So this is the inner conflict. I want something that I don't want to want. So these affections now, they induce this inner conflict because of their meaning. So these affections, they are problematic because they mean I am in love with my best friend's partner. Now, in order to pay attention to these affections, in order to not pay attention to these affections selectively, now this person needs to know that they would induce in a conflict. But this shows that she must know the meaning of these affections. So she must know, oh, this means I'm in love with my best friend's partner, and then infer, oh, this would create this inner conflict. Otherwise, the inner conflict wouldn't arise. And this seems to make repression impossible, because I need to know the meaning of these affections in order to not pay attention to them, in order to make them unconscious, but it presupposes that I pay attention to them and know them. So this is a paradoxical situation, and this is even one of the main objections. Already Sartre raised this objection against repression, and I think it's also known from the literature on self-deception. So then let's look at the separation model. The separation model describes our scenario as follows. So here the idea is that there is a separation of an affective state from its semantic categorization. So basically, in our example, that could mean that this person simply says, "Oh, my affective state here, it's hate." So I have now separated the affection that mean I'm in love with my best friend's partner from each other, and just attributed a different semantic content to it. So maybe in Dretski's words, it means that to be thing aware of this being in love, but not fact aware. Beyond who defends the separation model, says that this affective state now is phenomenally conscious, but not access conscious. So this being in love is now still felt, but it is not accessible as a state of being in love with someone. And actually, Beyond adds a procedure of how this separation arises. So we had a procedure before that was inattention leading to not knowing something. And now we have the result of separating an affective state from the semantic categorization. And the procedure, according to Beyond, is that there is a hot emotional state, a hot affective state that induces an impulsive reaction. And this impulsive reaction either is or has the consequence that's not so clear of miscategorizing the affective state. Maybe, so Beyond actually has a different example, and I will briefly mention his example to make it clear what he has in mind. So his example is a woman who gets a cancer diagnosis and immediately has this very strong fear of death. And this is such a hot state that this impulsively leads to an impulsive act. So she will immediately just miscategorize it. So just think, I'm just so nervous because I have an exam tomorrow. So she has these feelings, which is a fear induced by her cancer diagnosis, but it is such a hot state that it induces this miscategorization. And thereby, so this miscategorization then is a separation of an affective state from the semantic content, according to Beyond. So again, I think that this model is problematic. Namely, so I think for many reasons, the main reason is that if you base a model of repression on hot affective states, then there is no inner conflict. So in this example of the woman who gets the cancer diagnosis, this alone suffices to induce this hot affective state that then triggers the repression, which is this impulsive act. And this woman with a cancer diagnosis doesn't have an inner conflict. She's just really afraid of dying. And this is not an inner conflict, it's just an emotional reaction, a very adequate emotional reaction to a very severe diagnosis. And this is why I think as such, Beyond's model is not a model of repression, maybe of something else, but not of repression, because it does not incorporate this inner conflict. I think there are other problems, but this is enough for now to look somewhere else. So here's my proposal. My goal is to find a mechanistic that is a stepwise model that illustrates the process from start to end. So from inner conflict to unconscious, everything is fine, and such that it is compatible with contemporary cognitive psychology, as I explained a few minutes ago. The core idea of my proposal is to combine the central ideas of both models, that is the higher order model and the separation model, in Bion's version, so with his idea that the repression is an impulsive act. So I think both models are on the right track. They capture something that is right about repression. We just have to combine it in the right way. So here's the model, my model of repression. It has 6 steps, and I will lead you through these 6 steps now. So it starts with an inner conflict. This is the surface description, and the inner conflict, I think we should think about this inner conflict as follows. So our subject is confronted with a certain stimulus, and because we want to go back to implicit bias in a few minutes, I will take an example that fits there as well. So for example, this person sees a woman and has a certain feeling. For example, she thinks, oh, this woman is stupid, or to stay in our repression example, oh, I'm in love with her. And this feeling now gets attention. I think that makes sense, that feelings are first and foremost there in order to be felt, so in order to get attention. This is, I think, but yeah, don't want to commit to that, but I think it makes sense that feelings induced by stimuli first, they attract attention. And this attention then leads to thinking about this feeling and having a propositional thought about it. Namely, I have F, I have this feeling, oh my God, I hate this woman, or I love this woman, or whatever. So that means this feeling now is felt, it is focus of attention, and it is categorized. So in that way, it is fully conscious. Now, this person already comes with a certain self-image and internalized social norms. And this will give you the standing desire of not to have F. So your self-image, if we stick to the repression example, my self-image is, or the self-image of this person is, she's a good friend, and she has internalized social norms that good friends do certain things for each other, which includes not having an affair with their partners, and so on. So that is, from that she has the desire not to fall in love with her best friend's partner. But now she realizes that she has these feelings. So this together now will induce a conflict feeling, probably the feeling of shame. And as a feeling, again, it attracts attention. So it is felt, and it is in the focus of attention. But now we take Bion's idea. This now triggers, this is the second step, an impulsive shift of attention. So this is now a combination of Bion's idea with the idea of selective inattention. So this triggers now a shift of attention towards whatever, something else, addiction, whatever. So, and as a consequence of this, so this is an impulsive act. This is not a deliberative, thought-through act. It's something that happens impulsively. Now, as a result, the attention is taken away from these feelings towards something else. So that means these feelings are not in the focus of attention anymore. And now this has as a result that the conflict is repressed because it doesn't get attention anymore. And therefore, the person doesn't think about it and doesn't have this occurring thought, oh, I'm in love with that person. And therefore, she's not aware of this. Or she doesn't categorize this feeling anymore. And this means that she is not feeling this conflict anymore. But still, this is an assumption we already made when talking about implicit attitudes, that these feelings might still influence her behavior towards her best friend's partner. And now the fourth step is necessary, so we don't stop here. So this is pre-repression, maybe. Namely, now repetitions happens. Namely, this person will again and again interact with her best friend's partner, and then again this will induce these feelings. Or she might think about her best friend's partner and have these feelings. And again, they will get attention. Again, she will think, oh, I'm in love with my best friend's partner. This again will induce the shame feeling, and again will induce this shift of attention. And this is now my empirical prediction. This will lead to, this repetition now will lead to an automatization. So now it gets a stronger connection between simply having this feeling, inducing this conflict feeling, leading to a shift of attention without having to take this route through consciously thinking and categorizing. And this is now automatic. And then this is an optional step, but this is, I think, where Biron had a good idea again about what could happen then, because now I'm not paying attention to my feeling or to this feeling anymore in that situation. And this makes it at least very likely that this person will miscategorize what is going on in her feelings. So she might still be aware of, somehow always when my best friend's partner is around, I don't know, I get nervous. But she might come up with different explanations that are do not lead to this conflict. Okay, now the situation is, so after we reached step 6, that the feelings are still there, but they don't get attention and they are not categorized, but they are still felt. But the person, because now of this automated or automatic connection, will not be able to pay attention to them anymore. Okay, so this is, I think, a model that, it's a how possibly model. So it's, of course, it makes empirical predictions that still need to be tested, but it's a how possible model that captures the surface description and gives us a step-by-step procedure how there is something starts with an inner conflict, leads to a solution of the inner conflict by rendering whatever induces the inner conflict unconscious, and then turning this into an automatic process. So how is that a better explanation when we come back to implicit bias? How is this a better explanation than APE and CIA?
Sorry, Beate. I just want to tell you that we are running out of time.
Okay. Yeah, so I will just, this is my last part anyways. Okay, so now the idea is that this is, and to some degree compatible with this system 1 or this dual system idea. Here, this could be the implicit attitude that Garonsky talks about, and this could be the explicit attitude, so the propositional reasoning. But the difference is that I'm not saying that it's consciously rejected to resolve inconsistency, but rather it is not attended to due to an impulsive shift of attention that gets automated or becomes automatic. And thereby I can avoid the problems of the CIA because I can now explain why people are surprised or even shocked, because repression is not a conscious process and these implicit attitudes become unconscious. They are not rejected based on explicit intellectual insight alone, but are due to an impulsive reaction. My model makes several empirical predictions. Due to time, I won't go through that, but probably many of you already have the feeling that this is not a purely philosophical model. Just as a side remark, Adam Hahn has recently published a study that show that that attention seems to be important. So they argued that people that are surprised at racial feedback until they pay attention to their biased reactions. So this is what this model would predict if you apply it to implicit attitude. So at least this part seems to be, there seems to be some empirical support, but of course it needs further empirical investigations. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Beate. So please raise your hand if you have any questions for our speaker. Okay, Eric, please.
Yeah, I was wondering, so first, very interesting. I don't know much about repression, so it was interesting to get the walkthrough of various views of that. I was wondering why, if you know you're having this feeling, you're aware of this feeling as you're having it, and then you shift your attention to something else, you don't remember that you had that feeling, right? So you have this, say, feeling of affection for your friend's partner, and then you're like, oh, you shift your attention away from that. But wouldn't you then remember that you had that? So I was wondering what you do about the memory issue.
Yeah, thank you. Good point. So I would think that, of course, the stimulus doesn't have to be an external stimulus. The stimulus could also be this memory that induces the same procedure that you remember. Oh, yesterday I had this feeling, and this will trigger the same procedure. So this memory could just be function as another stimulus.
I see. So you repress the memory as well as repressing the stimulus itself.
I mean, in some sense, you don't repress the stimulus. The stimulus is still there and still conscious, but you repress your affective reaction. Or not even the,
Right.
so you still have the affective reaction. You repress the categorization. So this labeling, this means I'm in love with her. And the same might be true for the memory. So you could you memorize the stimulus, you memorize the affective reaction, but you do not remember that you thought, oh, I'm in love with her, because this is exactly the part that you repress. This is what it triggers the impulsive shift of attention.
I guess I'm wondering if the issue then would still arise at the same level, right? So you're having this conscious feeling, and then you're having the memory of the conscious feeling, and each time you're shifting your attention away, but it still seems like, wouldn't there be a memory of the fact that you had this feeling, and the memory of the fact that you had the memory of the feeling? And maybe you can say, oh no, well, you're going to shift your attention away from the memory of the memory. But I'm just wondering, I mean, maybe that's a virtuous regress, or maybe it's a vicious regress. I'm not sure. I don't have a strong sense of which it is, but yeah.
So the model says that as soon as you think, oh, I'm in love with my best friend's partner, this will trigger the impulsive shift of attention. And of course, at the beginning, you will probably think that a couple of times, at least for a while, until this impulsive shift of attention is triggered. And then it needs this automatization. And interestingly, so the prediction, so probably this automatization sets in only after you internalize these social norms. So probably kids don't do that. Interestingly, there's research on kids and implicit biases. Kids will, until the age of 6, I think, they will just tell you, no, I dislike African Americans. I think girls are stupid. They will just tell you all this. And then they internalize these social norms, and then they will realize, oh, I have this conflict. And maybe they will think that a couple of times until this is an automatic process, because they're feeling ashamed will always lead them to, I have to get rid of this. So I shift my attention, and then this automatization sets in. And this could be triggered by memories or external stimuli. As soon as it includes this meaning, this, oh, I am in love with her. Oh, I don't like African Americans. Oh, I think women are stupid. So it could be a memory or a stimulus that induces this thought.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you both. Jose Luis Luna, would you like to talk, or should I read your question? Because we have a question by Jose Luis. Jose Luis. Laura, podemos encender a Jose Luis, por favor. Sorry. Okay. He says that he doesn't have a microphone. So he asked the following question: Couldn't it be cases of implicit bias? Sorry, couldn't cases of implicit bias be considered a mode of failed self-deception? I say failed because it ultimately expresses itself in behavior. I believe that P, but I force myself to believe that not P. However, in the behavior, P appears again and again.
Yeah, sure. I mean, either this is just a different term for what I call repression, and I think many people just call repression self-deception, or argue at least that there's a strong connection. And maybe this, yeah, I think it makes sense to say that this is a version of self-deception. And it has all this, the surface description, it's still there, it still influences your behavior. Yeah, so I think if you think that this is an alternative account, then you need to know more in what you think self-deception is. And it's probably the same challenge. Self-deception is as paradoxical as repression. And then you need to, yeah, you have to give me a model of the self-deception, and then I can tell you whether this makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I have a short question. Well, so Laura has a question, but I just want to give you a short question, and it's like, I think that the term of repression is a little bit problematic, because it always makes you think about Freud and all those folks. But also, I think that it also makes you think that there's something like a mental mechanism, a brain mechanism of repression, and some people may be suspicious that you may not find like a mechanism like that in the brain. But I think that your model is pretty clear that, I mean, it doesn't need to be a clear, at least, mechanism, and it may be like more something like an attentional effect. Triggered by conflict. So I was wondering whether something like a global workspace model of consciousness and how information gets into consciousness may be suitable for your account, in the sense that it helps you to explain how, like, because, you know, one of the main claims of the global workspace theory that, you know, you only have conscious awareness of stimulus or emotions that are attended. So it may help you to make all your predictions and the behavioral explanation. And the global workspace also allows for unconscious information triggering directly behaviors. So I was wondering, what would you say about this idea? And then
yeah, I think that's a very good idea, to then see at different models of consciousness and see how this fits to this model. And I think the global workspace model fits nicely. I don't know how the global workspace model deals with affective states that are just felt and not categorized. So I would think that this doesn't need attention. And so this model started from thinking about, or observing, that different people in the repression literature and in the implicit bias literature, when they talk about unconscious, they actually mean quite different things. It's not felt, I can't report it, and I think that these are all maybe slightly different things. And I think these affective states, they are still conscious in the sense that they are felt, but they are unconscious in the sense that they don't get attention, therefore are not categorized. And I don't know how this, it's still felt, is compatible with the global.
Yeah, probably not.
Probably not.
Yeah, but I mean, that, I think that's a problem for them, not for you. So yeah, I think.
Good.
Yeah, Salvador, please.
I'm not so sure about what I was going to say anymore, but I just wanted to ask you, sort of, why you thought that miscategorization, I mean, you said it was sort of an optional step, and that sort of, I found that sort of strange, because intuitively I just thought that miscategorization would be very important for an account of repression. And specifically, well, I was thinking, though I'm not so sure about this anymore, that it could be sort of a good way to deal with the memory issue, so that you could say something like, well, you wouldn't need to be committed to the idea that you always have to repress the memory, but rather that due to original impulsive shifts of attention, you miscategorize this state. So the specific phenomenology of this state becomes sort of associated with a bad categorization, and then you can remember it in a miscategorized way. I was just thinking that, I'm not so sure anymore, just because I'm not sure how the impulsive shift of attention would exactly factor into that. But I was just wondering about why miscategorization was not
yeah. No, thank you. That's a good point. So I think, I mean, when looking at Freud and psychoanalysis, it seems to be it might be an important part. So they think that now what is repressed now becomes conscious in a disguise. So it's now looks like something else. So this is something that you see in psychoanalytic literature. So this is, you now, I don't know, you hate your father, but instead I don't know. So this miscategorization there seems to be an important part. But when we just look at separation, miscategorization doesn't seem to be necessary as long as the affective state is separated from its meaning. But I think, so in my model would just make the prediction, if you have a certain affective state triggered in a certain situation where you remember something or see something, but you don't pay attention to it, it will just be very difficult to categorize it correctly because you're not paying attention to it. So it is just very likely that you miscategorize it if you want to. So yeah, in this scenario, you just maybe just realize that something changes when your best friend's partner enters the room. You're not really paying attention to it, but somewhere in your phenomenal background, something has changed. Maybe you think about this, and then maybe, and then you come up with an explanation. It's just very likely that you don't come up with the explanation. I'm in love with my best friend's partner, because you're not really paying attention to it. But I think you're right that this might help with this memory issue that Eric referred to, that you just you remember something, just something different because of this miscategorization.
Yeah, I was just thinking, because I think there might be situations in which you're sort of directly confronted with the feeling due to some external circumstance, for instance, in an IA, in an implicit I don't know what the test is called, the test in which in order to determine whether you have some implicit attitude. But in that kind of situation, it just seemed to me as though, it's true that some psychologists have said that those kind of tests show that you do have some awareness of the feeling. But in that case, I think still you report a different explicit attitude, and you're still sort of, in that case, it would seem to me as though you would be in some way, pressed by external circumstance to be confronted with the memory of the feeling, and you couldn't so easily shift your attention from that. But that's just sort of beside the point.
Yeah, thank you.
Carlos.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Krickel, for the talk. I found, well, I would like to ask something very basic, since I am not a specialist in these topics. I mean that the approach is more or less Freudian. I would like to ask you about the role of dreams in the identification of implicit attitudes. Do you think, for example, that the dreams are somehow the identifiers of these implicit attitudes? I mean, so you think that dreams somehow help to identify those things that we don't pay attention to?
Thank you. That's a very interesting suggestion, but I don't know anything about, I don't know whether there's any research about the connection between dreams and implicit bias. So everything I could say here is just, I would have to make things up. I don't know anything about any research on that connection, but it seems, interesting.
Well,
Yeah, it seems that like philosophy of mind is getting interested in dreams. So I think it's time to get into this possible relationship between implicit biases and dreams. Yeah, I think it's a promising way of research.
And at least it would make this connection between psychoanalysis and implicit bias even stronger. And maybe then we could all like have dream analysis, dream interpretations to get rid of our unconscious racisms and sexisms, and maybe then psychoanalytic therapy would help us.
Yeah, I think that like, yeah, that's a further question, like whether there's a way to get rid of our biases, but like it's already difficult enough to understand what they are and to track them, and then there's a further question of how can we get rid of them, if we can get rid of them. Probably Eric will have something to tell us about whether we can get rid of our biases. So I would like to thank again Professor Beate Krickel. Please all thank her. Yeah, yeah. You know, I don't know why in our version of Zoom we don't have the emojis, so we don't have the clap, the hand clap. But in any case, Beate, thank you very much for accepting to be here with us. We are very happy to have you here, and we really enjoyed listening to your talk. So now we have our next speaker, who is Eric Schwitzgebel, a professor from the University of California in Riverside.